Hello, everybody, and welcome to another episode of Discussions with a Theist. I'm your host, Drew, with the Atheist Reformation. Joining me once again is my guest, Michael Lofton. How you doing, Michael?
Good. How are you?
I'm doing fantastic, man. So we're having a bit of a special episode today. That's why I've got the goofy little background going. I'll try to move as little as possible so as not to enrage the green screen deity that lives
Right.
within my camera. And so today we are covering morality in Star Trek: The Next Generation. And when we start talking about each individual episode, I have a little banner for each of them that gives you a reference to not only the episode name, but also the season and episode number that it should be in. For everybody to review, go back and look at, go back and watch if they want to. It's also been in the description for this episode since I posted this video, the preview for the video. So, everybody should have had plenty of time to watch. That way, nobody's confused as to what we're talking about today. But first, of course, Michael is the inimitable host of Reason and Theology, which I've been a contributor on a few times, and I've had some of their other contributors on here as well, such as Elijah and Father Ramsey. And looking forward to have both of those guys back on here real soon. Um, if you want, go check them out at Reason and Theology on YouTube. There's also reasonandtheology.com. You can check them out. I think I've got everything plugged for you. Any new books coming out lately, Michael?
Not offhand, actually. No books. Right now, I'm working on or just starting a doctoral dissertation, so it might be a while before I do a book.
Okay.
Yeah,
Well, you got to
that
do what you got to do.
that's gonna have me busy for a long time. So,
I'm sure it will. Well, also, everybody please remember to like, comment, and subscribe. And after you subscribe, hit that notification bell icon just in case the subscription notifications don't quite come through. As always, please follow the Atheist Reformation on Facebook at facebook.com/the Atheist Reformation. And if you want to be on the show, Discussions with a Theist, have a topic you want to put forth for discussion on the Sunday show, or you just want to be a guest contributor for an interview or have an idea for an episode, feel free to give me an email at theatheistreformation@gmail.com. So, without further ado, let's jump into it, shall we?
mm, let's do it.
All right, so the first episode we're going to be covering is season one, and depending on where you go, it's either episode 7 or 8. If you go on Netflix, it's actually episode 7 because they roll the pilot episode and the second part to that episode into one big hour and a half long show.
Mhm.
Um, but if you have like the DVD box sets or any of the old VHS tapes, um, yeah, it's episode 8.
Mhm.
And
Mhm.
this is about justice. So, brief little synopsis of it is the Enterprise lands on a planet in a sector inhabited by the Edo people, and as far as I can tell, everything's all peaceful, hunky dory, yay, go everybody. And then Wesley Crusher, aka the little twerp version of Will Wheaton back in the 80s, he's playing ball with some of the kids, trips over something, falls through a planter shield thing, and crushes some plants. And they run over and they're going to execute him right there on the spot. They get a little vial of poison and everything, right, ready to rock and roll. And there's this whole little debate going on as to whether or not Wesley should be subject to it. There's the talking about the concept of ignorance of the laws and whatnot. So let's get the Catholic moralist take on it and see how we go.
Yeah, because there's a lot going on here,
There
even
really
just
is.
within the episode, because they're discussing, should they interfere with the Edo people and their
Hmm.
justice system because it seems to go against the Prime Directive.
Right.
And not only that, but they also have kind of a space being that's looking over them that they consider to be God, but is really just kind of an advanced civilization that looks over them.
Hmm.
And they're saying not to interfere with the people in their justice system. So Picard, he's kind of between a rock and a hard place. He has to make a tough decision here. Do
Hmm.
I violate my own law, the Prime Directive, to protect another one of my laws, and that is to protect my people,
Right.
and also violate their law and even put my people at risk because of this, these overlords, if you will, that are looking over the planet. So, yeah, it kind of brings us to what is justice. How do you know what is just? If a nation or a society gives positive law, they give a law that is initiated by them, by man, not necessarily by God. Um, is it something that is absolute, or can we violate it? And I don't know if want me to go ahead and give a little spoiler alert on what Picard decides here. Uh,
They just go ahead and
Everybody, yeah, probably already
skedaddle.
knows.
Yeah.
Um, Picard and Riker both kind of note that, all right, no law is absolute. So
Mm-hmm.
we can break this law, especially in order to preserve another one of our laws. And they, end up convincing the aliens to allow them to go ahead and break this law and save Wesley and pretty much break the law of the Edo people. Well, so then the question is, okay, is positive law absolute?
Mm-hmm.
So my concern is, if we have nothing but human law, positive law, and not divine law, not something given by God, um, is that law absolute? I'd imagine both of us would say no. But here's the problem. If human law, positive law, is not absolute, then does that mean that law is relative? So that's kind of the problem that we have here. Now, from, of course, a Catholic perspective, no, it's not relative, because positive law is going to yield to a higher law, divine law. So if something in mankind's law violates a principle that we see in divine law, then that's, of course, going to yield to divine law. But if we don't have that, if we're operating from an atheistic or an agnostic perspective, all we have at this point is positive law.
Mm-hmm.
And of course, if we're going to say it's not absolute and we can dispense with it, upon what basis can we dispense with one law over another? And does that then mean that law is and justice is really just relative and it's not absolute?
I would say our justice is relative. I mean, one need look no further than the American justice system to kind of see that at work, at play, in that there's exceptions to virtually every rule that we've come across so far. And so we also look at things in gradations. We see
Mm-hmm.
things in a variety of degrees. So, of course, like the Edo people, they have a single punishment no matter what the crime, and it's death. It's just instantly we walk up, stick you with a needle, boom, dead, donezo. Whereas in our society, and I'm not even going to say polite society, I'm just going to say
Mm-hmm.
our society,
Mm-hmm.
because we don't really have a way to judge this fictional
Mm-hmm.
um, culture of people, even though they refer to themselves as barbaric, although that seems a bit more of a dig at Picard's point when he's sitting there talking to them.
Yeah,
And
they
that
didn't
is
believe that they were barbaric. They were just
right.
saying,
We
for
look
in
at
your
things
eyes,
to
we
see
don't
the
believe this.
punishment fitting the crime.
Mm-hmm. So then is kind of my problem. How could you, from your perspective, say that this society, if it were real, obviously this isn't real, but if there
Mm-hmm.
were a society like this, how could you tell them that no, they should not execute Wesley? And that would be unjust. Upon what basis would you be able to say that? Or would you say that, hey, no, they're right by their own laws. They have every right to execute Wesley for this.
So I would say that by their own law, they're on their planet, and yes, that's their law, that's their society, their culture. Now,
So that is just.
it's justice for them because, like I said, justice is relative.
Is it justice for you?
Is it justice for me?
Yeah.
It doesn't matter. I'm not in that situation.
No, but
Um,
let's say you were.
let's say I was
Let's say.
Wesley Crusher.
Yeah, yeah,
Oh, of
yeah.
course not. I would think it's unjust to me because I'm not familiar with the legal system. But there
Okay.
again, people that aren't familiar with our legal system are still subject to it
Ignorance of
within
the
this
law
country.
isn't. Yeah, yeah.
So, I mean, in all honesty, while on some degree I agree with talking it out and eventually leaving with Wesley to not allow him to be killed. At the same time, to a different degree, I agree with the Edo people.
So,
It was their law, it's their society.
mhm,
Their law was broken. They had,
mhm.
they had, as far as they were concerned, they had every right on their planet to dispense justice how it works on their planet.
Do they? And that's the thing. If you were Wesley, would you say, "Yeah, no, y'all have a right to go ahead and execute me. Let's go ahead and do it." After y'all have had a discussion about, whether or not this is right, and they
To be
still
fair,
say,
Wesley was ready to do it too.
"Yeah."
Wesley was ready to step up and do it,
Hmm. But would you?
and recognize it. Would
Would
I?
you? Would you defend their system at the end of the day if you're Wesley?
I wouldn't necessarily defend the system. I
Hmm.
would I would defend that this is the system that they have chosen. This is what seems to have worked for them. But just because it works right now and has worked in the past does not mean it's going to continue to work on in the future. And so
Okay.
that's the discussion to have. And
So,
that was part of the discussion with Picard and them, except that the way Picard kind of went about the discussion was a little bit dismissive, and I think
mm,
that's
hmm,
why they got a little hostile. It was like, oh well, we're just barbarians, I guess. Um,
hmm.
Instead
So,
of, because it's all about how you talk to people too. I mean, so that can change a
sure.
perception as well.
Yeah, but I could see if they spoke charitably to each other, they probably wouldn't have changed their views. So, I mean,
Well,
you're saying if this works for them, let's say no, this continues to work for us. We're putting you to death right now. Would you argue and say on some other basis, no, this is wrong, or would you say, well, hey, it's working out for y'all, so yeah, go ahead and put me to death? Is that how you judge what is just? It just simply works out, pragmatism.
well, I look at justice the way it's defined in law, and in all honesty, justice is defined as the result of fair and proper application or administration of the law.
And is that fair? What they're doing?
It's it depends on your perception at that point. It's all a
But
matter of
well, I'm
perspective at
asking
that
you.
point. Me?
They think it's fair, but
They think it's fair, right?
I
And
imagine
so
you don't.
no, I would disagree.
Right,
Obviously, I'm
right,
alive. I'm
right,
kind of
right.
attached to being alive.
Yeah.
But just about anybody would. I mean,
Uh-huh.
I would even go so far as to say that even the criminals on that planet don't necessarily think it's fair, but that's the system they're in.
Okay, but it sounds to me like you're basing this on some other standard when you say it's not fair, and they're saying it is fair.
I'm basing it on the standard of what I've experienced within a different justice system.
See, all you can say at the end of the day is that this is unfair based on my experience of the justice system that I have on my planet. That's pretty much all. Or are you able to say more? Do you have a more objective standard to judge them by?
I would say I would not even say necessarily, well, yes, more objective perhaps, in looking at, say, when it comes to the Star Trek universe or TNG and whatnot, they have an almost non existent recidivism rate. Recidivism, for those who don't know, are people who are uh, found guilty of a crime in this court of law, and they're convicted and they serve their time, have their punishment dispensed, so on and so forth. And then they go out, commit the same or a similar offense, and end up going back to a correctional facility. And so, with their really low recidivism rate, and they can speak to an objective statement of, when we release these people, they've been rehabilitated, they actually do better and are generally more law abiding in the future. And we do
So,
see that even in our own justice system today. Um, it
but
state
the
by
Edo
state
people
varies.
had a really good system there to where the vast majority of people would not violate their law because they don't know where the random punishment zone is. So
Mm-hmm.
they're always, on edge, careful to not break any law. And
Mm-hmm.
that works really well for them. That's pretty much why they don't have any police officers. They just have these mediators who patrol and maybe
Well,
deal with one issue a day.
the mediators act as judge, jury,
Right.
police,
But
and the hangman too. So
sure. But the problem is their system works really well for them.
Okay.
They don't have a lot of crime because it's so strict. So because the results are really good, that is that they have very low crime rate. Does that then mean that this is justice? And I think we would both say no. But I can say no on one basis
Well,
because I'm going to judge
the
it by
difference
divine
that
law.
we're talking about here, and I think there's a bit of a conflation of terms here, because okay, like I was saying, justice from a legal perspective is the the fair and proper administration of the law. So on that planet, the fair and proper administration of the law on the planet Edo would have been to execute Wesley. So in a way, that was not justice. By him leaving, that was not justice because, like I say, justice is relative. Just perspective matters on that. What you're talking about is justification. Justice and justification are not the same thing, and you're conflating the two a little bit.
I don't think so. I think
I would
that
say that you are, yeah.
oh, you would say that in their system this is just, even though you believe that this is not fair. You would still
Correct.
say that's just.
Correct. It is
Mhm.
their. It is how they view justice. That is
So
their
here's
perception.
how I'm
I
defining
don't view it as
justice then.
justice because I don't. Well, I don't view their justice as justified. There
Right.
is a
So
difference.
yeah, here's how I'm defining justice, because at one point all kinds of things were legal that should have never been legal, and they still were considered just according to our system.
Mm-hmm.
Um, Giving to each one, um, to whom, or giving to each person what is due to them. That's how I would just define justice. Giving to each person what is due to them. Is it due to Wesley to be killed for stepping on a plant? No,
In
no.
that legal
In their
system,
justice
yes.
system, they can say yes, but I'm going to still say all day long that's not just, because they are not properly giving to him what is owed to him. That the crime does not fit the punishment. This is not justice. So
Okay,
I
but
would
at that
say
point,
in
you're
their
appealing to something
system,
completely outside of that. Uh,
absolutely. I absolutely am.
and I know you would appeal to something outside
I
of that.
absolutely am. But actually, I can even appeal to things just within their own system. I don't even have to appeal to God really. I could say that um, the stepping on a plant is not nearly as grave or serious of an act as killing a person. So even removing God from the equation, I can say that this is not an eye for an eye. This is, a head for a toenail. I mean, this is
Okay, but at the
two
same,
completely different.
but
It's
here's the
unfitting.
problem though. You're arguing based on your particular perspective of what justice is.
But I
You're
think
not arguing
all
based
of
on
them would
their system.
agree. All of them would agree. A human life would be more precious than that plant. And if they don't agree with that, I don't think that they're being reasonable at that point.
Okay, then they may not be reasonable. I mean, a justice system doesn't have to be reasonable.
One or two of them might not be reasonable, but I guarantee the vast majority of them would see the reason in what I just
And they
said.
may agree with it. And you saw that they did agree with Picard's assessment of the situation. However, that is their legal system. They were even telling him, just take the boy and go.
Mhm.
They were encouraging them to violate their law.
I don't remember them encouraging. I don't remember this
They
part.
did in the discussion with Picard before Picard took the one
Who
lady.
was encouraging the Edo people?
Yes, the two, Rivan and the dude that was with her.
I don't remember them consenting to it. I remember them giving a lot of pushback. But hey,
No,
I could be wrong.
they consented to it. I
Okay.
literally just watched the
I
episodes
I did
again
too,
before
but
doing this.
I could be wrong. I mean, it's
Yeah,
not really.
they did say it's like, well, you can just you can easily overpower us.
Yeah, you
You could just
could,
take
but
him.
they're
You
not
can just take
saying
him and
do
go.
it. They're saying you can, but they're not saying go ahead and do this.
Mm-hmm.
They're saying you have the ability to violate our laws and do what we don't want you to do. I remember them doing that.
Except at one point, it's like you have the ability to do this. Why not just take him and go?
Yeah, they're just
And it
trying
was
to
asked
understand where he's come from.
right, and then he explains the prime directive and all that. But
Mm.
also, we have another completely separate level of interpretation we have to look at in the prime directive itself.
Hmm.
because at this point, it really shouldn't matter. They've landed and they've made contact with the Edo people. They have already interfered. They have already violated the Prime Directive. So what's violating it again?
Yeah. Well, two wrongs don't make a right. I'm
Two
sure
wrongs,
that's what
two
he
wrongs
would
don't
say.
make a right. But
We're just making it
again,
worse.
maybe making it worse. But at the same time, you're still looking at what perspective are you attacking this issue from?
I think he
Because
was in fear of a court martial, and I don't think that
no, I
he
think he was
was
more in fear of what that random four
that
dimensional
too. That too.
like AI
Yeah.
collective was
Yeah.
going to do,
Right.
and that's when he made the appeal, and then they allowed the transporter to work, and it's like, all right, screw off, get out of here, just don't mess with them anymore,
Right.
leave these people alone. They're ours, they're
Right.
mine.
Right.
And so, again, they appealed to their higher standard. They appealed to what they viewed as their deity, as the reason for the laws being what they were. So,
And
and
this
I
alleged
think,
deity agreed with them that they had a better case of justice than
right,
the Edo
because they
people.
remembered where they came from. They remembered what their justice system was like, and they thought about it. And so they were able to reason with them based on just having a discussion about what is our role in society and how justice can be different, because justice is not always equitable. And I think, yeah, I've got a comment right here. Harry pipes in and says that justice is not always equitable, and
It
he's
should
absolutely
be. I
he's
would say it's
correct.
not truly justice then. We might call it in our justice system just, but I would say it's not truly just then. It should be equitable. You give to each one what is due to them. That is
No
what we
matter
would
what.
consider what is due to them. Now, you could withhold a penalty upon certain conditions. You could do
Okay, but
that.
see, now you're getting into a legal gray area here.
Hmm.
Now you're getting into these gradations. Now you are no longer being equitable.
Hmm.
We
No,
have two. No. Here we go. We have two
hmm
people.
hmm
We have you're saying that equitable, that justice is people getting what is due to them.
hmm
So we have two people. Both are pulled over in a traffic stop,
hmm
and both have some narcotic substance. Doesn't
hmm
matter what it is.
hmm
Let's just say it's pot. We'll just
hmm
go with that. That seems to be a hot button thing. Why not?
hmm
They both have the same amount, and they both cooperate with police.
hmm
For one, it's his first offense.
hmm
For another, it's not his first offense. It's his first drug charge. But he's had, say, speeding tickets in the past or whatever.
hmm
They both go to court, both get the same judge. Everything else is the same. The punishment for that crime is 6 months in prison. They should both go to prison,
hmm
by your estimation,
The only time that I would
because
say
that is what is due to them. Because there is no exception given under the law,
they should,
at least not in
no,
Texas.
they should. The only time that I would ever say one could dispense with enforcing something like justice is if justice has already been served in some other way. That is the only way that I would ever grant it.
Except that the penalty on the books is simply 6 months in prison.
If that's all it is in that system, of course, but I'm talking about
Okay,
in
this
another
is our
system.
system. This is
If
our
you're
system.
just talking about this particular system, not considering anything else,
Right. No, I'm talking about our American justice
just
system.
this system. Okay.
Yeah.
All right.
But here's the thing though.
Mhm.
We make dispensations on
Mhm.
that all the time,
Yeah, I don't think that that's right. If
because we
that
give
is
second
the
chances to people, because like, okay, this is your first
Mhm.
offense. You've never been in trouble before in your life. Okay, well, I'm going to use my authority as a judge in this state, and
Yeah.
instead of sending you to 6 months in prison, I'm going to have you pay a fine, and
Mhm.
you're going to work community service for X number of hours each month for the next 6 months.
But you are
And
giving me a
that's your
difference
punishment.
here. One of them does have a prior offense, the other one doesn't.
No, the law reads the same. This amount is found. This is the penalty.
Doesn't this same law allow for a reducing of penalties
Nope.
whether or not they have a prior offense?
Nope.
That's
That
not
is
in the system.
Nope, it entirely falls under what is referred to as judicial discretion, and that is entirely up to the judge handling the case
But
once it
that's
goes to
part
the
of the
penalty
law.
phase. No, it
Judicial
isn't.
discretion is part of. So
But there
the
is
judge
no
doesn't legally
guideline.
have the ability to
The
give.
judge legally has the ability to make changes. However,
Mhm,
the changes that are made are not in the law itself.
mhm,
In fact, judicial discretion is actually not even written in as law. What it is legal precedent that has been made over a period of time through
mhm,
subsequent cases.
mhm,
A judge exercising his or her personal discretion for a situation.
mhm. But
So
there's
again,
there's provision for this. Um,
there's precedent for it, not provision.
well, when the judge does this, he's not doing something illegal.
No, he's doing something that we recognize as acceptable within our legal system. It's
Exactly.
it's not defined as legal or illegal because there's not actually legislation governing it.
There's absolutely no legislation saying that the
It
judge is
depends on the
able to give
state. In
6 months to
Texas,
one person and 4 months to another, by
it
discretion.
it depends on the state. In
Hmm.
Texas, it comes down to sometimes particular laws. Like
Hmm.
there are some where they'll say precedent of judicial discretion does not apply. Where like in a capital case, judge generally when it gets to the penalty phase only has three options.
Hmm.
Well, yeah, and it's life without parole, life with parole, or death penalty.
Yeah.
And those are the only three options afforded to a judge at
Hmm.
that point. And that's the only discretion that they actually have.
Hmm.
But when you get into misdemeanor offenses and things like that, they have sweeping discretion as to what they can do.
Well, I don't know enough about our justice system to really comment to that end, but what I can say is just hypothetically, if you have a justice system that says,
Mm-hmm.
all right, you have two people who have committed the exact same crime,
Mm-hmm.
and let's go ahead and say that they have no prior offenses. So we'll make it even less complicated here. The judge gives one person a year in prison. He gives another person 6 months in prison. I
Okay.
would say that's not just.
Okay.
If that is those are the only parameters, unless there were something else that's being introduced that would, reasonably prove that, okay, this person's sentence should be reduced. Unless you can introduce something like that, and we're just saying all things are equal,
Mm-hmm.
one person's given a year, one person 6 months. Yeah, that's not just.
Okay.
I
No,
would say that's not just.
that would not be just because that's
But
not a
if
fair and
but if the
proper
justice
administration.
system said that a judge is allowed to do that, so
Mm-hmm.
it's now legal, I
Okay.
still say it's not just.
What you're saying is it would not be a justified action.
We can use you if you want to use the term that way. That's fine. I use the
I
term
because
justice different. Yeah.
I agree that you use the term justice different, but the term justice, the way you're using it, is not applicable in this situation. And the reason why is because we were talking about a legal system, we were talking about a system of laws. And so for that, I would say categorically we need to use how justice is termed in the legal system.
Within that legal system, it's considered just, but I don't believe that I should only determine whether an act is just based on whether or not it's legal.
Right, and that's where we separate justice from
And that's
justification.
fine. If you want to use the term justified, that's fine.
Yeah.
I don't care what you call it. You could call
Right.
it trouble with tribbles instead of
Well,
justice. I don't care what you call it.
it's
As long as we're talking
it's
about the
more
same
to
thing.
right. Well, it's not so much that we're talking about the same thing. Is that I want to make sure that like a term, especially like that one, is delineated, is differentiated because, especially for those who are watching that may not grasp initially what it is we're getting into on that, the difference between a moral justification and what is legally defined as
Yeah.
justice.
I would say it's not right. Let's put it that way.
Okay,
Even
there
though
we
I know
go.
justice
Perfect.
and
That
righteousness
works
are
just fine.
the
It's
same
not
thing.
right.
Yeah, I
I
would say
can
it's
I
not right.
that's a
Even
lot
though
easier to work
the
with.
two
It's a lot
terms
less
come from the
confusing.
same Latin term, but
They do, but we define them differently in English.
we
And
do. So
but
in
yeah,
our way of speaking, I'll rather use right. I don't think it's right. It might be in the system considered just. I
hmm
don't think it's right. And
you
I
don't
don't think
consider it to be moral.
I don't think it's right morally. No.
Okay,
I don't. And
okay,
so I would say that at that point, the legal system needs to be reformed to reflect what is right rather than we just say, well, hey, I mean, that's the system, you know? No. So the Edo people, for instance, Their system should be reformed to reflect what is right, not, well, hey, this works for us because it really reduces the crime rate. Yeah, sure. Okay. Yeah,
And I would
anytime
argue, and I
somebody
would,
does wrong,
and
you kill them. Right. That works for the crime rate. Sure, but that's not right.
and I would argue exactly the opposite.
You would say it's right?
No, I wouldn't say it's right. I would say it's morally subjective. I would say that they view it as right, that that is
They
morally
may.
correct for
They
them.
may, but I think a lot
Just
of them
because I
wouldn't,
think
but
it's just because I think it's morally incorrect, that doesn't change their mind, and they still see it as morally correct. And so
See-
at that point, you have two choices: either you try to work within the system to change it, or if I don't remember whether or not they said they were spacefaring or not, but potentially have the option to just leave
but
that
you
society.
can't say they're wrong, is what you're telling me. You can't say they're wrong. You could just say, in my opinion, this is what's considered right, and you consider
Yes.
that right. But you can't say, no, you're wrong. You shouldn't be putting Wesley to death for this.
Right,
You
I
can't
can
say
look.
that.
I can look at them and tell them, it's like, look, this doesn't make a lot of sense. We need to talk about this, but I can't actually tell them you're flat out wrong. They have determined that this is their moral system,
Yeah.
that this is how they morally define things, and I vehemently disagree with it. I don't like it. But it's their justice system, it's their planet. And so my option is to simply, if I don't want to be subject to that system, I can just leave. And that's what I would choose to do.
You might have the freedom, but the people living there don't. So,
Well, that was never actually established as whether or not they had the freedom to leave or
not in this episode, no. I'm just talking about in general. If we had it, because we actually do have cultures like this that have penalties that don't fit the crime, and I would say the people who are living in that system, this is wrong. It's
Right.
wrong, and they might not
Now,
have the
I can
option
sit
to
there and
leave.
tell them, I can't tell them, morally correct or morally incorrect, but I can tell them, it's like, look, based on these objective observations that have been made, these course of actions work better than your course of action.
Pragmatism. It just works better than your system.
Right. It does. Well, it does work. Yeah, it does work better. It is more effective. It yields more positive results.
So as long as it yields a positive result, doesn't
No, it's
matter.
not so long as it yields a positive result. Is that this method yields more positive results while inflicting less harm.
Okay, so the basically
The objective should be to, at least if I'm going to argue from the secular humanist perspective, in regards to this particular episode, would be to yield the greatest amount of positive results while minimizing as much.
that sounds like
minimizing or eliminating harm.
utilitarianism to me. Is that correct?
I'm sorry.
Utilitarianism.
I don't think so. I haven't read up on utilitarianism lately.
It's basically
it might be like on like kind of surface level.
it produces
but
the
it's
greatest good for the greatest amount of people. That's utilitarianism.
right, but this is not saying the greatest good for the greatest amount of people. This is saying the greatest good for the least harm. And so
Okay.
it may not be the best for everyone. It may not be the best for the hugest number of people or the largest number of people, but it is.
So you would say that certain acts are justified even if they are not in favor of the vast majority of the people, as long as it brings the greatest amount of good for a certain minority of people?
No, it's just it yields the greatest overall positive effect while having the least amount of harmful impact. For instance, like when. What's a good way to put this?
But I mean, wouldn't serving the greatest good for the greatest amount of people be exactly what you just said?
No, not necessarily, because
When
like,
would the two conflict?
Okay, so when you talk about terms of like economic impact, for instance, I'll just use the COVID stimulus bill because it's right there, it's quick, easy access, whatnot. So, they're attempting to stimulate the economy, and they're also attempting to help people pay for things they may not be able to pay with because they're furloughed from work due to quarantine, lockdown in their local area, what have you. And so money was provided to them for that end. So that was something that did not go to everybody. Now, it went to a very large number of people because they basically threw the doors off of who was eligible to receive it, but that's neither here nor there. What you're doing is you're applying a cost-benefit analysis of sorts.
But I still don't see where the difference is, because it still sounds like what is happening here with the stimulus bill, in theory, is that this is the greatest good for the greatest amount of people.
To some extent,
So,
yes, but
so
it's
your
not all, but it's
definition,
not going. But just because the greatest good for the greatest number of people does not mean that that the greatest number of people is receiving all that money.
maybe. So I mean,
So
when I say greatest amount
like
of people
giving.
for the greatest good for the amount, what I'm saying is the greatest good for the greatest amount of people is that good is going to those people.
Okay,
now,
well then
now maybe the
at that
stimulus
point
check
though,
is not,
well at that point, well no, at that
favorable
point
for
the
everyone,
greatest
but
the greatest good for the greatest number of people in that instance would be to give $1,200 to literally everyone, to every
But if you can't
to
do
every single
everyone,
person.
you can do still a majority. In other words, utilitarianism is the greatest good for the majority of the people rather than for a minority.
Right. But what I'm talking about is trying to have the greatest effect for society as a whole while inflicting the least amount of harm. So they gave $1,200 to X, Y, and Z amount of people.
But that's not then the greatest good then. If it's inflicting other greater harm, it's no longer the greatest good.
Right. If it is inflicting greater harm, then yes, no, it
Right.
is no longer good. It's no
Right.
longer it's no longer a good thing.
Did the stimulus bill do that? Did it inflict a greater harm?
We won't know that for probably about a year or so.
Okay.
In all honesty,
So maybe we don't know in this
I'm
case.
I'm just operating under an assumption for that.
Right, right.
You know,
So
thought
let's
experiment,
just
that kind of thing.
assume. I mean,
Let's assume that it's good, that it
Okay.
has no harm.
Yeah.
Okay, so we didn't give money to every single person.
Mm-hmm.
We could have. Some would argue that we should have,
Mm-hmm.
but we didn't. So the other side of harm is how much money is the government actually having to spend at that point. And so we see that as that's another level of harm that's happening there, is economic impact on the federal government. But let's just completely dismiss that for right now. So the only thing we need to see for this to have worked is that the American economy was stimulated, in that more purchases happened. If that occurs, then that is arguably good for every American, though not every American received money.
All right. I still don't hear this being very different than utilitarianism. This still
It's
sounds
not
like
it's not super
utilitarian.
duper different. I'm not saying it's like a a polar opposite
Yeah,
to it or
it's
anything.
probably some form of it. Yeah.
Yeah, there may be some deeper form of it. I would need to really do a deep dive into utilitarianism, which I honestly haven't done lately. So
That's
I
what
may
it sounds
do that
like.
at some point.
And if that's the moral framework you're working with, I think I have a problem with that, because one of the classic critiques of utilitarianism then is slavery, of course. Let's say
Right.
you enslave a minority amount of people
Well, see, that's where
for
that
a
issue of
good
harm.
of a whole lot of people.
That's where that issue of harm comes in, because utilitarianism on the surface doesn't deal with harm at all. It only looks at the end. If the end is good, the means were justified.
Doesn't matter what the means are.
Precisely. That's like raw utilitarianism.
Okay, so there's
That's where that harm aspect
there's
comes in.
episodes
There
of
is a
this
ton of
in
harm.
Star Trek. This comes up there a lot, actually. Let's say you can save the lives of a whole planet of people, but you have to kill one person to do it.
Well,
You
see,
have
that was potentially the issue with this episode right here that we're talking about. Is if they did not allow Wesley to be executed, what would the entity or collective AI or whatever have done to the Enterprise, and thus the thousands?
Let's
of
say
people on
then
board
they
there?
were going to destroy the Enterprise,
They were going to
and
destroy the Enterprise.
and let's say there was more people on the Enterprise than on the Edo planet. So
Okay.
they're going to destroy the Enterprise.
If
So-
they don't, if Wesley's not allowed to be executed,
So clearly more people than the entire planet, and especially the only person who's actually going to be killed here is Wesley. So
Right.
one person versus an entire starship. So the means doesn't matter as long as the end is good.
In utilitarianism, right, it wouldn't
Mhm.
matter.
Now, are you
Um,
saying in this case the means? No, you can't kill Wesley to save the whole starship, or
no,
would you say no? We do kill Wesley for that.
I'm not saying you can't. I'm not even saying you should. I'm just saying that in that moral framework of the way secular humanism looks at morality, it would be morally justified to allow Wesley to be executed because you have known quantities here. You have Wesley dies, everyone on the Enterprise lives. Wesley doesn't die, everyone on the Enterprise dies. And then Wesley still dies.
Well, let me give you a better one from Star Trek. It's from the episode Ethics. I know it's not on our deal here, but it is.
I haven't watched that one lately, so
This is the one where Worf, has a container fall on him and he becomes paralyzed and he's contemplating committing suicide.
okay.
And there's a doctor who's, on the starship with Beverly, and she's wanting to try out some of her new experiments and new procedure that she hasn't really tried on any humans or, anything like Worf or Klingons.
Okay.
She hasn't actually tried it on anyone yet, but she thinks that she can save a whole bunch of lives if she tries this procedure.
This exact quandary will crop up in the next episode we talk about.
Oh, will it? Okay.
Yes. So we're gonna go. So at that point, we're gonna go ahead and dispense with justice here,
Mm-hmm.
and we're gonna move on to the next one. Okay.
Mm-hmm.
So now we're talking about season 2, episode 9. This is the Measure of a Man. This is Data on Trial,
Mm-hmm.
and the commander that shows up to disassemble Data
Mm-hmm.
has never done this before. Has
Right.
not successfully built a positronic brain, lacks the necessary ability, as far as anyone can tell, to safely execute this procedure. And Data very well could not be Data upon reassembly and reactivation.
Mm-hmm.
So
But if
that's
successful, he could create a whole race of datas, and that could do a lot of good and save a lot of people.
but
And
see, there
stuff
again,
like
there's that wonderful word race. You have a whole
Mhm.
race of datas.
Mhm.
Okay, well at that point, how do we define how we treat that
Mhm.
that group,
Sure.
that category of entities?
And that's what's being debated. Is
Right,
Data a
and
toaster, or is he?
right, is he a
You know,
toaster? Yeah.
does he have rights? Right? Is he
Hmm.
alive?
Well,
But
it's not is he alive? It's not even is he alive?
they do discuss that some. But
Mm.
then they also discuss, does he just have rights?
Well, the thing is, first they discuss whether or not he has rights,
Mhm.
and then the argument is made that he is not an individual. He is not a person. He does not
Mhm.
have personhood. He is property. He is
Mhm.
property of Starfleet. Even though, and this also would have been a better part of the case to make on Picard's side in defending Data on this one, in that he was admitted and recognized as an individual entity, as a person by Starfleet Academy. He went through Starfleet Academy, graduated, and then was assigned a rank, and then and he's a lieutenant commander, which means he has command over people. He has authority.
Mhm.
So they have already ascribed personhood to
Mhm.
this entity, which I think would have been a better opening salvo for Picard at that point.
Mhm.
Personally, they didn't do that. I don't know why. Um,
I didn't think of it.
but it's so
Gene Roddenberry just
obvious.
didn't think of
It's
it. Yeah.
so obvious, though. At least to
Mhm.
me. At
Mhm.
least to me. But there again, I nerd out over crap like that. So
Right.
Anyway, is he a toaster or?
There's that.
Then
But before we talk about that, let's
okay,
put a bow on this other discussion by
okay, okay,
using
okay,
this episode.
okay, sure,
Do you
sure.
kill or risk killing Data or whatever, not being dismantling him and not being
Mhm.
able to recover him
Right.
fully, whatever? Do
Let's
you
just
do
say
that?
killing Data.
Yeah.
Killing
Do you
boss.
kill? Do you kill Data or and save a whole bunch of lives? Let's just put it in that that
Well,
light.
no, we'll keep it in the context of and make a whole bunch of datas, which possibly could save lives. So it's not
Yeah, but see
guaranteed that they're going to
that
save
makes
lives.
it a
It's
less
possible.
stronger scenario.
It doesn't
That's why I
matter. It
would say
doesn't matter.
worst
But
scenario.
still, gradation is everything when you talk about this kind of stuff. Like for instance, okay, like we were talking about with Wesley there. Okay, Wesley dies and the Enterprise lives and all of its people on there. or Wesley doesn't die, the Enterprise is destroyed, and then Wesley's going to die anyway.
Let's say that Wesley could live in that case. Do the ends then justify the means? Do
No,
you kill one
because
person to save 100?
much greater. While it's not an easy choice to make, much greater harm is visited upon a larger number of people.
Mhm.
Again, it's not just about the greatest good, but also as what level of harm is being inflicted. And at
Well,
this point, the way it's set up is there's no way to not inflict some level of harm.
but there is a difference between you actively causing the harm on a person and then that harm coming from outside on this group of people. Where so in this case, let's say you have the choice. You have to kill Wesley, or this group is going to kill your starship people in your starship. Now you have to actively inflict harm on one person
Hmm.
to save a whole bunch, 100 people from having harm inflicted on them. In
At
this
that point, I
case,
would just tell a person to watch Starship Troopers, and you'll see that in action the entire movie.
but do the ends then justify the means is my concern.
Again, we're getting into effectively situational ethics, so it's not informing an entire morality. It's in this particular situation, what is the ethical decision to make? And so, based on that, if
You have
I'm the
to.
person in command and I have to make that decision, especially given the military setting of it is the duty of a commander, is the duty of the leader of his ship, of his unit, of his amount of people to get as many of them out alive. And if that sometimes involves making a sacrifice, whether it be for yourself or someone else or of someone else, then you have no other option but to do that.
That's no
And
longer
Picard,
situational ethics, though, because that's now you're applying a standard from without to the situation. Situation ethics is it's relative to that situation, but you're using a
it is
standard
relative to
outside of
that
it.
situation,
But
but that
you take
situation
an
is not
external
common.
standard. That standard was that he needs to protect all the greatest amount of you know people. You introduced that into the
Well, no,
situation.
because no, the situation is you're looking at a military situation with a commanding officer dealing with his people. It's already intrinsic to the situation at that point.
Okay,
So we're
but it
still
would
looking
then
at
be
it.
intrinsic to every other similar situation, so it's no
No,
longer
it's intrinsic
situational
to
ethics.
well, situational ethics is the analysis of a particular situation. This
Okay, so
particular
that's where we have a
situation
different
has that
definition then.
intrinsic.
Yeah, we have a different definition then.
Okay.
Situational ethics is usually in my circles defined as the morality of this situation
Hmm.
is determined um, relatively on the spot. It's there's no greater objective morality outside of it by which you judge the situation. It's just willy-nilly, In this case, I say yes.
Okay, so
In
you're
another exact
eliminating
same
all
case, I say
potentially
no.
extrinsic information, basically.
And
It's
it can be
just A,
entirely
B in
inconsistent.
this.
It's relative. There's no objective morality in that situation. Another situation comes along just like it,
I
and
would
you can
say at
say
that
different.
point, those are kind of pointless discussions to have. I mean, like, yeah, they'd be fun little thought experiments, but ultimately pointless because nothing we do, no decision we make exists in a vacuum.
I
And the
agree.
level of situational ethics that you're talking about at that level is a singular decision being made in a vacuum.
But what they'll generally try to do is they will dismiss principles of morality
Hmm.
that they will use in other situations. They'll accept them in other situations, but dismiss in this particular situation with no real consistency. That
Right,
is
and so
more situational
that's why
ethics. Yeah.
I don't that's why I don't like that version of situational ethics.
Mhm.
If I'm talking about situational ethics, I'm talking about what are the ethics of this particular situation, and that
Yeah, that's
situation is
different. That's not
every
how. Yeah, we're defining it differently,
yeah.
and that's fine. If
So
that's your definition, okay, I'll
yeah,
accept that. That's fine. So, I
yeah.
mean, because obviously every just decision that you have to make involves a situation. It's never, subsisting out in the air somewhere. It's
Well, no,
always
it's
in.
not so much that. It's like everything is. It's not that everything expressly is situational. It's just that we have this general framework that helps to govern situations, and then the particular situations we have to determine exception, exemption, or uh,
but there has to be
extension.
principles that allow
Right,
you
you
to,
have a
yeah,
baseline you have some kind of baseline governing principle, but
right,
again, morally that's determined by a society, the
right,
way
right,
I see
okay,
things.
and where it, and yeah,
And that's
okay.
where we get into the subjectivism thing again. So anyway,
Now back to
back to
measure of
data.
man, yeah.
Yeah. So
Is
Picard
he alive or
successfully
not?
argues
Huh?
that's not the question being asked. The question being asked is he
Does he have rights?
sentient?
Is he sentient? I think that that's the
Because if
same
he is
thing.
sentient, no, because you look at how sentience is defined in there. Sentience was defined as being intelligent, being self-aware, and being conscious.
What thing meets those descriptions that isn't alive?
Nothing that we're aware of.
Could something be alive that isn't in, well, I mean, yeah, obviously could something, of course, plants. Let me rephrase it then.
Well,
Everything that
but do
meets the
plants have
description,
intelligence? Plants are alive, but they don't have sentience. So
correct. So
that does not necessarily exclude sentience from being applicable only to something that is alive.
everything that's sentient is alive, but not everything that is alive is sentient.
Correct.
Right. So
So that doesn't
if
exclude
data is
not
sentient, though, he's also alive. You can't tell me he's not alive, right?
in that regard. Yeah, we have to say that on some level he's alive.
All right, so we're in agreement there. Okay, that's
Yeah,
fine. So
we would
let's
have
talk
to
about
agree
this.
that we would have to agree that he somehow is alive. Now,
Mhm.
is it the same way that we define what life or being alive is?
No, there's
No.
modes of life. A plant lives in one way, an animal lives in a different way, I live in another
Oh
way.
no, I'm talking about the fact that data is at least up until the point of like the second encounter with the Borg, purely synthetic from top to bottom.
Hmm.
He's purely synthetic. Um, as far as being made of entirely man-made materials, this, that, and the other. So positronic brain, skeleton, like droid skeleton, all this stuff, and then he has this just skin suit on,
Hmm.
essentially.
Hmm.
Oh, Harry chimes in and says artificial intelligence is sentient, but not alive. I would still say that that depends on how you're defining alive at
So
that point.
define sentient for me one more time.
Sentient, okay, at least in the context of this episode,
Hmm.
was intelligent, self aware, and conscious.
I think if you're conscious, you're also self-aware, right?
Mm,
Is that
no, not entirely necessarily. We had it depends on how you describe self aware.
Mhm.
Like for instance, there have been instances where people who are in a coma are aware of what's going on around them. They're aware of the situation they're in, but they are not conscious. For instance, they would toss something to them and they would catch it. They're not conscious. There's no spike in brain activity. They're just somehow aware. But again,
that's not self-aware
it
though?
really kind of determine. We really have to break down what do we mean by self awareness.
And what do we mean by intelligence? Let's start there. How is data intelligent? I mean, yes, he is intelligent insofar as he stores a lot of information, but so
Hmm.
does my laptop.
True, true. But that's where we go to the next criteria though, and that is self awareness. Is your laptop self aware?
Okay. See, I define intelligence differently, but that's okay. We can accept that.
How are you defining intelligence then? Let's look at that for a minute.
Yeah, probably intellection, the philosophical concept of intellection. So the ability to take to look at a particular and extract from it the universal. And we're kind of using Platonic and Aristotelian metaphysics here. When I use those terms, I'm
Hmm.
talking in those categories. So the being is able to look at a particular and extract a universal from it. Animals don't do this from what we've seen.
Hmm.
Therefore, we would not say they have intelligence, even though they do some things that are really smart, if you will. But we would say by that definition, they don't have
Well, see,
intelligence, and
I
that's
would not agree with that because at that point you are effectively judging a fish by its ability to climb a tree.
no. We would say that they don't have the ability to extract a universal, and we see that in all evidence. They
But see,
don't
there
have
we get into
language, they don't have
another
religion.
issue of are there universals at that point?
Yeah, sure. We would have to get into that. Yeah,
Yeah,
I'm taking it for granted that we both believe in universals.
yeah. I see. I see the problem with universals, and I'm not entirely sure where I stand on the whole thing. In all
Okay,
honesty,
and that's
like
fine. Yeah.
to me, what seems to solve the problem of universals, and even the problems of nominalism, is trope nominalism. But even that invites its own issues as well.
Mhm. Well, and
Um,
that's fine. We don't necessarily have
yeah,
to agree on this particular issue.
right,
We just might have a different definition, but that's
right.
okay.
So I would,
I'll accept your definition of intelligence for the moment.
yeah. Well, intelligence, the way I would see it is that the way we understand intelligence nowadays, that's the ability to problem solve, to communicate,
Okay.
and things like that. So in that way,
Problem solve,
everything that is alive has
communicate.
some level of intelligence.
Okay. Now, problem solve, communicate. My laptop does both of those. All right. So
No, it
we
does,
can't
but
go into just
it
that.
doesn't do that on its own. It requires input from you to
Okay.
do it.
So now
You have to operate it at that
on
point.
its own. Okay.
Right.
So on its
Um,
own.
well, no, because the laptop can be intelligent. It can solve a problem. It still requires input, but that's where that self-awareness thing comes in.
Okay.
It's aware of itself. It's aware of its existence.
Okay.
So at that point, a dog, a chimpanzee, these both of these animals have intelligence because they are able to problem solve and they are able to communicate. We may not understand what they're trying to communicate, but they do make attempts at communication and they communicate with each other.
How do you determine something is self-aware, that it's aware of its own existence? How do you determine that?
Um, that goes a lot of different ways in all honesty. For some, it the what I've seen the most readily kind of gone to is awareness of mortality, awareness or being afraid of dying, essentially, or having an awareness of mortality.
How do you know it's actually a fear, or and not just something that they've been programmed to say?
I'm sorry, what?
How do you know it's a legitimate fear and not just something they've been programmed to say based on certain inputs? Because, you know, everything can problem solve and communicate on its own with input that's been given to it. And we as humans have input being given into us, and we problem solve and communicate on our own. It's based on input given to us, just like a laptop has input given to it and it does these things. So, how do you know it doesn't have just input being given to it that puts out this result of I'm afraid of dying? How do you know it's an actual fear and not just I'm putting out this result
Well, see, that's the
of
thing.
I'm afraid of dying? How do you know it's
Right.
a
Well,
real
that's the
fear?
thing. We don't know that. We don't really have a
Okay.
way of accurately measuring that because even us,
Okay.
babies as infants, we will put ourselves in mortal peril
Hmm.
because we're not aware of our mortality. We require the input of no, 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 that's dangerous. We have to be taught not to accidentally kill ourselves
Hmm. Hmm.
as
So
people.
that in and of itself, I agree, is not adequate enough
Right,
to
and so
constitute
that's what I'm
what's
saying. It's like I would agree that it's not
what's
adequate.
yeah. Yeah. So I would
I
say
mean,
that's still not a full definition of
right,
what's sentient.
it's definitely not a full definition.
Mhm. But
In
that's what I'm
fact,
trying to get. I'm trying to get a
right, and
full
that's what we're
definition.
trying to arrive at. And so I figured it's probably
Mhm.
smart for us to go through and analyze, each aspect of what we kind of uh, understand to kind of see what's going on. And so everything that I'm finding when they talk about self awareness is having conscious knowledge of one's own character and feelings, and then going a little further, the ability to focus on yourself and how your actions, thoughts, or emotions do or don't align with your internal standards. But that seems more
But I
like
mean,
self help stuff.
but how do I know that a computer isn't doing that?
How do we know that we are? A
Okay.
person can say that they are.
By your definition, I don't know. I mean, I have a very different definition for what's sentient than you
Okay,
do. So by
right.
your definition, I
I'm
don't
just
know.
using the show's definition, and so
Okay, sure,
seeing
sure.
it how they argued it, I'm kind of like isolating
Mm.
it to that particular microcosm. That's why, like when we talked
So
about the
by
morality of
their
the situation,
definition, do you think data is alive then?
if they're going to argue based on their definition of sentient, then the only thing that they didn't explicitly show was whether or not Data was conscious. They didn't get to that point, and I wish they would have, because I would like to have seen where that discussion would have gone. But at that point, of course, the morality play, the bad guys got to lose, the good guys got to win, yada yada yada, and they kind of cut it short there. And the judge makes a ruling. You know, Data has rights, or at the very least, Data is not property. So they didn't actually agree as to whether or not Data was sentient. They merely reached a conclusion that Data, for whatever reason, is not property. Because
So
there was a
they never
slavery
really
argument
ruled,
made at
you would
some
say.
point. Say what?
But if he's not property, he surely then is sentient, right? Or at the very least alive in some way.
He is at least acknowledged to have what we would call personhood, I think.
But
He's at least-
everything that
he's
is
at
a
least
person is
recogn-
also
he's
sentient.
he's recognized as an individual entity within this society, at the very least.
Everything that is a person is ordinarily in their right state of mind. They're sentient.
Right. That's the assumption. And they've treated Data as if he's sentient this entire time. So I would say they're going to be hard pressed to argue against it to whatever degree. But even so, the JAG officer was talking about how this was something best left to philosophers and whatnot, because it was talking about
Yeah.
because she explicitly referenced metaphysics.
Right. Right.
And so it's an interesting thing. I know, right? And so,
Because Gene Roddenberry, I mean, he's aware of all this. He knows what he's doing
yeah.
when he
Oh,
writes.
absolutely.
He's aware of the
Well,
philosophical problems.
he really is. He's aware of the philosophical problems, and he cuts it off there at what he agrees with. And so, me personally, if I'm being completely honest, Data's a machine. He's a toaster.
Then then how do you deal with the nanobites in another episode? They're also considered alive pretty much for the same reasons. Would you also say no, they're not alive? The scientist was perfectly fine to just kill them all.
I would have to go
Quote,
back and
unquote,
watch that episode to kind of see like the actual context of it.
There are a
But
bunch of
raw-
nanobites.
but raw take, if they're a synthetic organism, essentially,
They
right.
were, but in the episode they're considered sentient. And then the problem is the nanobites are starting to harm humans indirectly by their existence, and so the humans were also indirectly harming the nanobites, if I recall correctly. But a scientist ends up going and deliberately harms them to protect himself, if I'm remembering it right.
Okay.
So now you have that issue of, do you harm all these
We'll
things
see
to
at that
protect?
point. We'll see at that point. I would have to make the same judgment. I said that Data's a toaster. Okay, those are all really tiny toasters.
Execute them all. Picard doesn't agree with you. They all
No, of
saw
course
this
not.
man
Picard
as
doesn't
Hitler.
agree.
They all saw this man as Hitler for going and destroying millions and
Yeah,
millions
they
of
did.
nanonites. He's worse than Hitler. Because Hitler, I mean, destroyed how many millions?
Yeah,
Well, this
he-
guy destroyed
approximately 11 million.
billions of nanonites. So
Yeah. And so
they
it's
saw
like-
him as just Hitler. It was,
They
you know.
did. They did. But I'd have to go back and watch the episode to kind of really judge.
It's not fresh
that
on my
particular
mind
situation.
either. Yeah,
But
yeah, I'd have to look at it too.
All right, so we're at the hour mark right here. So everybody, right now, I want you to start putting questions in the comment box in the live chat so we can address those here as soon as we're done talking about our next and final episode here, and that is Season 4, Episode 22. This is Half a Life. Starring one of my personal favorite, in all honesty, voice actors, David Ogden Stier. That guy was great. For those of you who don't know who he is, if you ever watched Beauty and the Beast, not the remake, the original cartoon, David Ogden Stier plays Cogsworth. He's the little clock. So, anyways, I'll let
Didn't
you
know that.
explain this. What?
I didn't know.
You didn't know that Timothy was. Yeah, Timothy.
I did not know that.
The
I didn't know he was the
Matrix.
clock.
Yeah, he was Cogsworth. Mhm.
Awesome. So basically, with this
Fantastic
one,
singer, too.
Yeah, I didn't know he was a singer. So Luoxana Troy, of course, Deanna Troy's mother,
Mhm.
is always looking for love. And she comes across this scientist who
Whether or not
comes
it's in the
on.
right places, it
Exactly.
is
It's
never
usually in the
really
wrong place.
known.
So,
We never know this.
right. So, and in fact, I think that's Gene Roddenberry's wife. Is it not? Pretty sure Love
I
Walks on Troy is actually Gene Roddenberry's wife.
I
I
don't
know she
know.
was in some of the original
She was certainly the right
original
age at the
series.
time, I would say.
Mhm. I'm pretty sure she was. I know she was also she played in some episodes of the original series too. But yeah, anyways, Loaxana Troy, she's the mother of
As you're
Deanna
explaining, I'm
Troy.
going to
She
look
meets
this up.
yeah, go ahead. So she meets this scientist who comes on the ship called Timison. They're trying to gather information about a star. I think they're trying to protect their own star from dying out. So this scientist has all kinds of data and information, and he knows how to save his own planet. All the other scientists don't know what to do to save their planet and their star. Um, but he pretty much has a really good working theory. He knows better than anyone else. The
Right.
problem is she falls in love with him. He
Mm-hmm.
falls in love with her, and yet he has to be put to death in a few days because
Well,
he
no,
turns
not
60 and
not put to death. It's
he
ritual
has to kill himself.
suicide.
Yeah, he has
Yeah,
to kill himself.
yeah,
What did they call it? The resolution.
yeah.
Yeah,
It's the resolution. Yeah.
yeah, he has to kill himself at the age of 60, as all their citizens do,
Mm-hmm.
because they believe this is a good thing in their society. There's two problems here. Number one, he fell in love with Loaxana, so he has something to live for. And number two, he knows more about how to save his people than any other scientist. So if they put him to death, they very well could be putting their own society to death. But
Mm-hmm.
they refuse to listen to him in his research because he is now refusing to return back to his planet. He wants to stay on the ship with Picard. He wants asylum because he doesn't want to go and commit suicide. He's starting to think that this is a barbaric custom
Right.
and that this just doesn't make sense. He has all the answers for to save his people, but they don't want to hear him
Right.
because
So
he's going against their own
to kind of
law.
jump on that, Majel Barrett, yes, she was Gene Roddenberry's wife
Mhm,
from '69 all the way until he died in '91,
mhm,
actually, shortly after this episode aired. And
mhm,
then she
mhm.
passed away
Yeah,
from leukemia
yeah.
back in 2008.
Right, right. So she was in the original series. Yeah, yeah.
Yes,
So
she did. Yeah, she was
she
a
goes.
love interest for Spock once or twice.
I remember that. Yeah. And I just don't like the original series. I know any Star Trek fan who's
I know
watching this probably
I'm gonna
hates
get
me for
attacked for
saying
this one. It's
that.
like I'm not a
I
fan.
can't stand it. I don't like Kirk. I don't like him at all.
No, I
I'll
don't
take
like the
Picard. I'll take
Shatner-esque pauses.
Janeway over Kirk.
I don't like the
I'll take
Shatner
anybody
pauses.
over.
I don't
I
know.
for some reason I
Janeway was
cannot.
pretty cool though. Janeway was
I
pretty
like
cool.
Janeway. I like Janeway, but a lot of people don't like Janeway, and I'll take her
No.
any day over Captain Kirk. I'll take Cisco over her.
Oh
I
yeah, from
like DS9.
DS9. Yeah.
I like
Well, see,
Voyager.
okay. So
I
here's
like
the thing: is like I don't like Captain Kirk. Like my favorite Enterprise captain to this day has always been Jean-Luc Picard.
of
But there
course,
again,
hands
that's the
down,
one that I grew up on, so that may have
hands down.
some level of bias to it. So I'll freely admit that. However, there were characters from the original series that I liked better.
Mhm.
Like I would take Sulu or Chekhov over Geordie LaForge.
I wouldn't, but I mean,
I
okay,
mean,
I'm not. I'm
I
not gonna
would,
fight you on it, but
and I would probably take Uhura over Deanna Troy.
oh yeah,
I
Deanna
think
Troy's terrible. I'll take anyone over Deanna Troy.
I mean
She's
the
horrible.
character is
She's
poorly
horrible.
written. Like
Yeah.
Marina Sirtis is a wonderful actress. I've seen her in other shows and other movies, and she's fantastic. That was just Deanna Troy was a poorly written character.
I can't stand her. I can't stand the way she talks. She says that she's trying to imitate an Israeli accent, which I don't recognize. I lived in Israel, and that's not an Israeli accent. But
Um,
she
it's
she
not
does
one
this
that it's.
little thing.
I don't
Yeah,
recognize it as an Israeli accent. To me, it sounds like
it's annoying.
mildly Eastern European.
I don't know. It's annoying. Whatever it is, her entire character. I think she was useless. She was basically the sex appeal for the show.
Yeah, well, I
That's
mean,
all she was there
so
for.
was Uhura, but at the same time,
Right.
her character was dynamic. She changed a little bit over time. She wasn't
Yeah.
just the Star Trek sex symbol. She had like a pivotal role here and there, and she actually did
Right.
inform and move the plot along and things like that. She wasn't just a set piece. And that was
Right.
one thing that was actually considered very ahead of its time with the original series. Because, I mean, this is 1966.
Oh
We're
yeah, no,
just coming
that
off
that
the
was
heels of
revolutionary.
Brown versus Board of Education, things like that. And now
Yeah.
you have a black female actress in
Right.
a lead supporting role on a television serial of all things. I mean,
In
so
fact, Whoopi Goldberg, she's on TNG. Whoopi
yeah,
Goldberg said
I
she
can never
owes
remember how to pronounce her character's name. Guinan. I
Guinan,
never
but
Guinan. Okay,
yeah,
I thought that's
Guinan.
what it was.
But she says she bases her entire career, in the film industry
Off
based
of a
upon seeing Ahura on
yeah,
the original series.
yeah.
She thought, wow, if a black female can be empowered like this, I can too. And so
Oprah.
she kind of,
Oprah has
yeah,
made callbacks to the character of
yeah,
Uhura.
yeah. So I mean, there's definitely a lot there,
Yeah, I mean, so,
as
but
far as
anyways,
implications on
back
society.
to back to the show, back to Half a Life.
Yeah, yeah.
Timothy decides he doesn't want to, and this is where it got a little weird for me. This is where it stopped making sense.
Okay.
Is when out of nowhere, they essentially changed it from um, effectively ritual suicide to a death sentence because they sent up warships and were ordered to fire upon the Enterprise if they tried to leave with Timothy on board.
Mhm.
That for me completely jumped the shark and completely derailed the episode. It didn't make any sense. I
Not
honestly
not
think
only
that
that,
aspect of it was not only poor writing, but was just to shoehorn conflict in where there didn't need to be.
maybe, yeah, I could see that, but also, I mean, by them going and doing this, they're also putting to death their very own hope for surviving as a society,
Right, to preserve a cultural norm,
to
essentially a
preserve a
tradition.
custom, right?
Right,
Right.
and I'm not a big fan of tradition as a whole because tradition,
But it's
if
their
you
law. It's more than tradition. It's a law.
right, it was a tradition that became law.
Hmm.
And so that's why I'm not a big fan of a lot of traditions as a whole. Like especially silly ones, like what's talked about by Luxana Troy in there about wearing uh, these big giant wigs that have room for a bird cage,
Hmm.
and they have a bird in them, and so it was considered high fashion at the time, and it kept going and going and going, became tradition. Then eventually, I don't think they ever said whether or not it became law, but it was like considered, you know, uh, essentially a crime against humanity to appear out in public without a bird in a bird cage stuffed in your beehive hairdo. So until someone kind of flouted that and was like, no, we're not doing this. And so looking at all that, um, tradition, if you want my like super condensed, not entirely serious, but at least makes sense in most situations. Tradition is peer pressure from dead people,
Hmm. Hmm.
and
Sometimes.
so well, no,
Sometimes.
any tradition. Like if someone starts a tradition, and that tradition continues, eventually that the person who started it is going to die. And if that
Some
tradition carries on, oh well, why do we do this? Well, it's
some
just how we've
traditions
always
could be
done it.
bigger
We
than
did
that
it
though.
because this person did it and whatnot, and so
But some
effectively,
traditions could be better than that. They could be bigger than that. They won't. They're not just because so and so did it, but they do it because hey, this is helpful for society or this is good.
right? But ultimately, a tradition still boils down to peer pressure from dead people. Ultimately, that's what I'm saying. I'm being ultra simplistic and kind of goofy with it. Like when you just look at it, just raw, right on its face.
Some,
Our
I,
our, our
I would say, some
constitution,
are that
our
way.
constitution is a legal tradition. That's peer pressure from dead people, our founding fathers.
I would say one tradition that we have is whenever you send like an ambassador to another country,
Hmm.
or let's say two people are at war, they send an ambassador to each other. You
Hmm.
never kill the messenger. You never kill the
Right?
ambassador.
Yeah.
You
Don't
never
kill
do
the
that.
messenger because
That's a
they're just
tradition,
yeah.
but it's a good one. It's not
It's a
just
good one.
peer
It's
pressure.
a good one. It's a good
Yeah,
one.
it's not just peer
But
pressure. So
still,
I'd say
but
some
still,
don't meet that description.
my definition has nothing to do with whether or not a tradition is good or bad. It's just merely saying it is peer pressure from dead people.
That's not merely peer pressure at this point. This is now something good.
it's something good, but you're extending the definition at that point.
Yes, I
All
would.
right,
I
so
would
that's a
extend
good
it
so
in
that's a
some
good
cases.
tradition. So that is a qualifier being attached
Right.
to what is already peer pressure from dead people.
I wouldn't say it's peer pressure from dead people, because the reason why we're still doing it is not necessarily because of dead people, but because this is
Well,
now
now
going
we've
to.
made it right. This is now considered a rule of engagement based on
We're not.
everything from the Hague Convention to the
Well,
from
we won't be credible with our enemies whenever we go to negotiate with them in the future, because they'll know we're just going to kill their messenger. So
right, exactly.
it has nothing to do at this point with dead people. It has everything to do with
Right at that point,
alive
but see,
people.
at that point, you've now exited tradition, and it has now entered the realm of practice.
Well, I see. This is also where we have a different definition than of tradition, but
Right.
that's okay. I'll accept your tradition, your definition of tradition for the moment. That's fine. We can work on your terms and operate with them. I don't
Well,
have a
okay,
problem with
okay.
that.
Look at this way. Santa Claus.
Okay,
That's peer pressure from dead people,
I think it's a
especially
stupid
especially
tradition.
especially the
The
modern
way it is
interpretation of Santa
today.
Claus.
Yeah, the way it is today. Not, I'm not talking about the actual Christian stuff
Well,
and
no, no,
values
no, no.
behind it.
I'm talking about
The way
commercial
it's done
commercial
today.
Santa.
Yes,
how
that's
how we
different.
understand Santa, how the overwhelming majority of people in this country understand the
Right.
character Santa
The
Claus.
Easter Bunny and Santa Claus. Of course. Yeah, I think that's
That's
stupid.
pe-
Of
that's
course.
pe- that's tradition. That's peer pressure from dead people.
That would be a good instance of tradition, sure.
Right. And also, who started that tradition?
But I would say some traditions are bigger than that. They are better than that, and they don't meet that
Well, but see,
description.
that's where I say that we start to get away from that definition of tradition as peer pressure from dead people,
Mhm.
and if something is a good enough tradition, it has some other value, it has some other net positive effect. Okay, well then we continue that, and it becomes a practice. Now we've
Mhm.
exited the realm of tradition, and we've gone into practice because a
Mhm.
tradition is something we do because we've always done it. A
But
practice is something that started as something we just did that became something useful to do. And so, because for instance, is it useful to put a Christmas tree up each year? Is there any use to that?
in and of itself, or in
In
certain
and of itself.
contexts?
In and of
In
itself.
and of itself, no.
The
But in certain
tradition,
contexts,
right,
it
okay,
could be
so
useful,
that is
sure.
so that is a tradition.
Hmm.
Whereas having the family gathering at insert holiday here,
Hmm.
because it brings togetherness, it has this beneficial application of it brings the family closer together, we talk about things, we have a good time, we enjoy spending time together as a family. That's a tradition that has, what I would argue, has become a practice.
Okay. And that's fine. If you're gonna now, say that it's
I
no longer.
separate them, for me, I separate them into different categories because I like to be very particular in what I'm saying. And so if I'm trying to convey a particular point, then I'm going to use different terms for different things.
And that's
It's like
fine.
the distinction between justice and justification. I
I
mean, yes, they
Hey,
have the same root. They have the exact same Latin root. Totally
I'm a
understand.
Thomist, and we use distinctions everywhere. So I'm
Okay,
all in
then. So you
favor
understand
of
where I'm
it.
coming from.
I am all in favor of distinctions. A person who
Okay.
lacks distinctions is not very, they're not very
Right.
reflective. So yeah, sure.
I mean,
Um,
they say the
I,
devil is in the details. It's yeah, but that's where the letter of the
I'm
law
I'm
is.
fine with that. I'm just saying we just use different, we
Right.
have different semantical signs for our
Precisely.
meanings here,
Yeah,
and
we have
that's fine.
different semantic expressions. Yeah.
That's fine. I can use how you're using your terms. What's going on here with half a life? It's no longer well, it probably was at one point a tradition. Now it's law. It's law.
Mm-hmm.
He's required to go and commit this resolution to where he commits
Mm-hmm.
suicide. But it's in conflict with some other things, like he wants to have a life
Mm-hmm.
with Loaxana. He
Mm-hmm.
also knows things that can save his own planet from extinction.
Mm-hmm.
So what do you do here? Well, they don't want to dispense with this. And in the end, spoiler alert, he goes and he commits the resolution, and
Right.
Loaxana joins him, which I think is ridiculous.
There she goes to witness the tradition. Yeah.
I think that's absurd. I think that's absolutely absurd because.
I would say that in all honesty, he was put into a no-win scenario.
Mhm.
It was, I can either stay and maybe figure this thing out, and then go to the resolution, or whatever, but their law is like, no, you can't go past a day or whatever nonsense like that. And then you have the situation of he's being essentially being forced to do it because they're going to attack the Enterprise if he doesn't go back. And so he's put in that situation where he has to make a choice, almost like Wesley did back on Edo in Justice. However, this was something that was a known outcome no matter what. Is he goes back and voluntarily kills himself, or he tries to stay, and then a lot of people are going to die because it's going to spark a military conflict in Federation space, of all things.
And then the Federation has a problem because do we violate the Prime Directive and give them asylum?
They're considered a Federation ally at that point. And so...
but he brings up the Prime Directive, if I'm not mistaken. I thought he did.
I think he does, but that was the weird thing. It's referenced like once and then never spoken of again. I mean, and it could be because it just expects everybody to understand, but at the same time... that's 4 seasons away. It's 3 seasons away from the episode of Justice where they really talk about the Prime Directive a little bit in depth.
Right. They do.
I mean, so
but they do bring it up.
They do bring it up. They do bring it up, but it's only one thing that one person references, and then it's never discussed again. So
it's kind of inconsistent because they didn't really at this point maybe have it fully developed. So
right. I think they may not have had it fully developed, or because this was at least the way I see it, an unprecedented situation in that this was a planet that the Federation was allied with. So there's obvious interference going on all the time because they have to communicate with each other, but they're isolationists within the Federation.
Well, the definition of the Prime Directive that he gave was interference with social aspects of a planet. That was his definition. Interference with social aspects of a planet. Now, they would be doing just that. They would be interfering with social aspects by saying, we're not going to respect your custom and we're going to grant this man asylum. So according to that,
but in particular, it was not just interference with social or the society, was of non-warp capable populations.
Yeah, but is it limited to them only? Or does it also pertain to the allies?
Well, see, that's the weird thing, though, is like in TNG, that's where that inconsistency comes in, where they change the Prime Directive like every couple of seasons. I'm not even joking.
No consistent definition.
There really isn't consistency to what the Prime Directive is. I mean, so...
They probably didn't have one, and they were just making it up as they go.
Right. We
probably just found some inconsistencies in the writing.
I think we did find a few inconsistencies in the writing. I really think we did.
We probably did. Gene Roddenberry, he couldn't think of everything, so no, of course it's not, okay. I'll give him a pass.
He still was brilliant.
He was. He really was.
Although the concept of the Prime Directive has been alluded to and paraphrased by many Star Trek characters during the television series and feature films, the actual directive has never been provided to viewers. The most complete attempts to define the directive have come from non-canonical works and include these 2 things. One is simple. The Prime Directive prohibits Starfleet personnel and spacecraft from interfering in the normal development of any society and mandates that any Starfleet vessel or crew is expendable to prevent violation of this rule. And, as the right of each sentient species to live in accordance with its normal cultural evolution is considered sacred, no Starfleet personnel may interfere with the normal and healthy development of alien life and culture. Such interference includes introducing superior knowledge, strength, or technology to a world whose society is incapable of handling such advantages wisely. Starfleet personnel may not violate this Prime Directive even to save their lives and or their ship unless they are acting to right an earlier violation or an accidental contamination of said culture. This directive takes precedence over any and all other considerations and carries with it the highest moral obligation. Yeah. So we've got 2 decent definitions going on, but they're not canon because in the show itself there really is There, you know what? We have a fictional representation of a violation of the law of non-contradiction.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Because the prime directive exists and does not exist at the same time in at least TNG. It exists because they constantly reference it, but it doesn't exist in that they never define what the hell it is. So
Nice.
congratulations, we have Gene Roddenberry can defy the second law of logic.
Right, there we go.
If anyone could, it's Gene.
There
Oh man.
So my thing here is how
So when we look at it from the Wikipedia thing and whatnot, which are non-canon, but they're referenced in non-canonical works, and that would be like the cultural evolution and things like that. Okay, it would say that, I mean, either everything that they have ever done is a wanton violation of the Prime Directive, or the Prime Directive is effectively meaningless.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
The way I understand that, those two
Right.
statements.
Right. So yeah, I mean it's clearly inconsistent. But my thing with this episode though is upon what basis are we able to say this is barbaric? Yes, it's part of your law, but when Loxana Troy tells his daughter, Timoson's daughter, this is barbaric, she got really offended, saying, how dare you judge my culture and my societies,
Right.
calling it barbaric. Upon what basis can we say that this is wrong to have people at the age of 60
Well, see,
commit
here's the thing.
self-suicide?
Though. That's not what she said, though. Her response was, how dare you question my beliefs?
I thought she said our society and our
No,
culture.
she said our beliefs. She
Yeah, I
said
heard
our
she
beliefs
did.
or my
Yeah.
beliefs. One of the two. How dare you question my or our beliefs? And so it wasn't, why are you questioning our culture? Because to them, the resolution is a sacred act. That's part of their religion.
But it's still part of their culture and their law
Right,
and
it's
their
their
society.
culture and all that.
Sure.
But there again, religion and culture are inextricably linked.
Mhm.
Because
Sure.
both inform each other.
That's
alter
fine.
each other.
And that's fine.
And so they're treating this act, they're treating this practice, this tradition with religious reverence.
But if it's disregarded, this is even illegal. This is going against.
Right. So to some degree, it's almost like they're a theocracy,
But then my problem is,
or at the very least, a theonomy.
how can we then say this is wrong, this is barbaric? According to their system, this is legit. I mean, you can do
Right,
this.
according to their system, it's legitimate. And so
How can Picard tell them, no, this is wrong?
he can't tell them, no, it's wrong. What he can do is, if we dispense with the terrible writing of like random assignment of warships to attack if they try to leave, the Federation has laws governing asylum. And so Timothy invoked asylum.
You think he should have given him asylum?
I would say it would have been okay.
But then he's risking his own enterprise.
If we're not dispensing with the warships, yes.
So does he do it then? Does he save this man's life?
No, with the warships, no,
risk
send
his
him
ship?
back.
Send him back.
Yeah, send him back. I mean, no, it's like, if that's the case, it's either we all die or this, like,
Okay.
the dude dies.
So throw
either
him
way.
under the bus to save everyone on the bus. Okay.
It's not even throwing him under the bus to save the people on the bus. It's putting him back on the bus he already accepted the ride on.
But he was born into this. He didn't have a choice. This is his society. He
True,
didn't choose
true.
to come to this planet.
But he could have chosen to leave prior to that.
I don't think he could.
I
He
don't
would
know,
have to
were
come back at the age
isolationists
of
with-
60. He would have to, and they were very much a xenophobic society anyway.
Yeah, they were xenophobic.
But even if he had left, he would have to come by 60 to kill himself on his own planet to be buried with his wife and all this and that. According to their rules.
To fulfill what he viewed as a family obligation of being buried with his first wife and whatnot.
But they kind of
Yes,
implied that that's the way you have to do it in their society.
Yeah.
So, I mean, he didn't have much of a choice here. He's born into this thing.
Well, no,
And
no, no.
so, is
He
it
still had the
right?
choice. He still had the choice of violating the law of his culture, of choosing to dismiss his culture and
At
adopting a
what
different one.
expense? At what expense then? So, would
As
it,
far as I can tell, they don't ever talk about what expense it is, other than that he's breaking that law. I mean, so
and risking
effectively,
war with the Enterprise?
yes.
Yeah. So he
How
knows he has all these people on the starship that he's accountable for.
that he's accountable for, yes,
Yeah.
but at the same time, I'm saying like prior to all this,
Okay. Okay.
if he had just chosen to
Yeah,
leave,
just left. Yeah.
if he had chosen to leave at some point prior to being
But
turning
he didn't
60,
believe that it was wrong. It was the Waxana that convinced
right,
him that this is
right,
wrong. So
Loxana
now
convinced
that
him.
he knows he's born into a society that is
Mhm.
doing something that is wrong, he's not really culpable, and he shouldn't have to face this because he didn't really have a choice. He just found out. So is it,
He just found out that there are other ways of living. Is was what it is.
and that this is
Is that
wrong,
there are other cultures, that it's wrong by someone else's standard. Sure,
and he adopted those standards. He believed that
right. He
this is
adopted those
wrong.
standards. You're right. He did,
Mhm.
but he then unadopted them and then went back to his original standards.
Well, I think he had still believed them, but he realized that, hey, I'm not going to win here, so I'm just going to go ahead and go
Probably
against what
so.
I think
And
is right. Yeah.
in all honesty, to me, it was just a poorly written episode.
Hmm.
Like if we look at the writing of the show, there was absolutely no reason for the whole warship thing,
Hmm.
other than to shoehorn in a conflict to result in someone's death.
Maybe, I mean, it's just there to really show that Picard can't give him asylum without there being serious consequences, more than just the Prime Directive. But now he's risking
But
a lot
still,
of
it was
people.
still shoehorned in there. It was still shoehorned conflict because, like, up to that point, um, even when he sat down and had the discussion with the leader of his planet and everything with Picard right there, he's like, "I can't believe you would do this," and then that was it. That was the end of the conversation. It wasn't until later on when they went back to talk to him again that they Picard ta- where they talk about Picard being serious about allowing him to stay and granting him asylum and all that, that the escalation happens. And so the escalation happens out of nowhere. It's just randomly up in the ante for no apparent reason.
Hmm. Hmm.
And that's where I say like it's just bad writing on that one.
Could
And
be.
and so
Could be. I mean,
yeah.
sometimes TNG has some episodes that aren't that great, and
Yeah.
parts of an episode that aren't that great. One thing I do like
Or
though about
entire
TNG,
characters that are poorly written for the
true,
entire
yeah,
for like
Deanna Troy,
all 7 seasons.
but what I do like about TNG is you have multiple storylines going on each episode.
Oh
So
yeah,
even if
no,
you're
they're
not,
always interesting.
yeah, so even if you're not interested in one of the things that's going on, and maybe something in a day in
Then
Data's
something
life or
else is
Data's
probably
life,
going to capture your
yeah,
attention.
something else is going to
Yeah.
be interesting. So, yeah, I
Oh
don't
yeah.
care about Beverly Crusher or Deanna Troy and what's going on with her seeing, lights in the sky. I don't care
Hmm.
about that. I just watch the other stuff.
Right. Exactly. Um, and so that's kind of where it goes to at that one. So it looks like we're not getting any questions at this point. We've been going for about an hour and a half.
I think that there aren't a whole lot of TNG fans out there anymore. I don't know. Maybe we're just alone.
What's that? I'm sorry, I didn't hear
I
you.
said, I guess there just aren't a whole lot of TNG fans out there anymore. I don't know. Maybe Star Wars has just taken over everyone.
No, Star Wars has not taken over. I'm okay. I am both equally a Star Wars and Star Trek nerd. I love them both.
I like them
Um,
both, but I'll go with Star Trek if I have to choose. Yeah,
um,
I'll take TNG any day. I haven't watched Star Wars in quite a while. I mean, I like Star Wars, but
yeah.
TNG, come
Star
on.
Wars is what Star Wars, but see therein lies the rub. There is that Star Wars were the big sci-fi movies that I grew up on,
Hmm.
whereas Star Trek was the big sci-fi TV show that I grew up on,
Yeah,
and so to me they were two
they are.
entirely separate entities.
They are.
And I mean, like, and I wouldn't even call Star Wars science fiction. I would refer to Star Wars as high fantasy and a sci-fi setting. Because I mean, when you look at it, you've got the mystical magical force going on. You have the sword duels, lightsabers, and all that stuff, and the political intrigue that you would expect to see out of high fantasy. But it's being done rather cleverly, at least in some of the movies, with this sci-fi twist to it. You have different planets, starships, high tech, all that kind of stuff, and so it's an interesting way of looking at a fantasy intellectual property, whereas Star Trek is very, very much sci-fi, and it's sci-fi that over the years became science fact to some degrees, like wireless communication, handheld wireless communication.
Mm-hmm.
Back in the 60s, they're like, no, that's like way beyond anything. And then in the 90s, we've got cell phones.
Yeah, there's all
So,
kinds of
so 30 years,
technology.
yeah, tons of stuff that started
Right.
as a Star Trek kind of
Oh
a
yeah.
trope almost that ended up becoming a reality for us.
Oh yeah. Yeah, and it
And
influenced quite a few people who are actually scientists and astronomers, if I recall
oh yeah,
correctly.
Neil deGrasse Tyson was one. Bill Nye. I'm pretty sure that. I mean, if you were to pull any random currently or any random person that was employed by DARPA in the last 30, 40 years, that some in their Netflix history or somewhere in their collection they've got some Star Trek or Star Wars action figures
Oh
floating
yeah.
around. I mean, something's there, man.
To me, it's classic,
It is. It
and
is.
and just my personal life, it was in every phase of my life, regardless of what country or city or
Yeah.
wherever I was.
Oh
That
yeah,
was always there.
I always had TNG to fall back on
Yes,
at some point. Yeah, no,
yes,
I used to have the DVD box set, all seven
yes.
seasons.
You know
I
what
used
I
to have
did?
some of the VHS tapes. I
I
used to
took
tape the
I
episodes.
That's what I did. I taped them on those recordable VHS and
Hmm.
just watched them over and over and over and over
I
and
think I
over.
got in trouble for taping a particular episode of TNG, not because I had taped TNG, but because I think I had taped it over somebody's birthday party.
Yeah, that'll do it.
I think that happened. I can't remember if it was Star Trek. I want to
So
say it was Star
weird
Trek.
thinking of the day when you would have to watch cable and tape something on
Oh
a
my gosh, I
VCR.
know, right?
Now we just watch everything on demand online. I mean, why
Right,
would
I
you ever
know.
do this? But
Yeah, and we're seeing a lot of industries kind of die because of that.
oh yeah.
Like, but then you have all these companies that are trying to, wrangle their IPs and bring them back under their roofs, and then just try and do the same thing but on the internet versus through a
Hmm.
cable line,
Hmm.
like with
Hmm.
CBS All Access and all of that nonsense. Yeah, but in all honesty, I don't see that working out for them.
Right. Right.
So, anyways, we had some disagreements
Yeah. Yeah.
here and
But that's
there.
why we do it.
Oh yeah, that's definitely why we do it. We need to do this again at some point,
I
man.
love it. Hey,
Like
there's
every,
a lot
I
of
think.
more TNG
Oh
episodes.
my
There's
gosh,
DS9 episodes,
there's
Voyager
DS9.
episodes.
I'm pretty sure we could also find some stuff in things like Babylon 5, even.
Yeah, I've never watched through the series of Babylon 5, believe it or not.
Yeah,
Battlestar Galactica was awesome. I watched through it.
hmm.
Stargate, all of them, watched through all of the
Stargate was
different,
really cool. I like
loved them
Stargate.
all, but I've never watched Battlestar Galactica, believe it or not.
You
Just
mean
never have.
Bab 5?
I'm sorry.
Yeah.
I've loved 5. I have watched Battlestar Galactica multiple times, in fact, all the way through. So,
Yeah. Well, Babylon 5 is a little bit harder to get a hold of.
yeah.
And in all honesty, from the way I remember it, I actually thought Babylon 5 was in a lot of ways superior to TNG,
Hmm.
just because the level of writing.
I'll have to watch it. I don't
Well,
know.
it had more
I'd have to
dynamic
watch.
characters in it and stuff like that.
Yeah, I don't know.
But there again, there were some ways in which it wasn't because, I mean, you didn't have Jean-Luc Picard.
To me, he's the man, Patrick Stewart. I mean,
Oh
he
yeah,
he
no,
makes that show.
fantastic,
He makes the show.
absolutely, very
If you
much
take
so.
him away from the show, I don't think it would be as good.
No, it would not be as good. The same thing with if you were to remove Michael Dorn as Worf or Jonathan Frakes
Hmm.
as Commander
Hmm.
Riker.
Yeah, but still, I would see them, even though as important as they are, I still see Patrick
TNG,
Stewart as the backbone of that show.
yes, he's
He is
definitely
it's like the Big Bang Theory without Sheldon. You can do away with the others, as important as they are, but you can't do away with Sheldon.
right. I think. Well, but see, I think that the reason why you couldn't do away with Picard, and it's not even so much Patrick Stewart as it is the character of Picard.
Yes, absolutely.
And
I'm referring to
that
character.
was done purposefully from Roddenberry's perspective. The way I always kind of understood TNG was that was Roddenberry inserting himself into the show, and Picard's words were what he thought about the situation. Generally speaking,
I've never heard of that. Did he ever confirm that in an interview somewhere or something?
It's Gene Roddenberry. He was deliberately cagey about everything just to get people to watch the show.
Right, right.
So no, I don't think he ever confirmed or denied it. You know how those fan theories go.
I love Picard's character. I think that's
Oh
really
yeah,
what
it's
makes
great.
it.
Yeah,
I really
Picard's
do.
character is what makes it.
Yeah. So I think you could lose Riker as a character. I think you could lose Geordi. You could lose Worf and Wolf, as
I don't
Loisana
think
called
you
them
could.
in the episode.
You couldn't lose Data though. You couldn't lose Data.
Yeah.
And here's what. And here's
Yeah,
why
I
I say
wouldn't
you
want to
can't.
see it without Data.
Well,
Yeah.
here's my take on why you can't get rid of Data. Not really, because there are only two characters in that entire show that ever actually get other characters, other main or supporting characters, to analyze how they see the world. Picard is one, and the other is Data, because Data, being the logic-driven machine that he instantly takes what someone tells him to its nth degree, and does that with just about everything. So he's more a philosophical mirror that every character looks into at some point and sees them reflected back at them at its utmost. And then that's when they start to question, well, what do I really think about this? How
That's a
do I
good
really
point.
understand this?
I haven't thought of it that way, but that's actually a good point because that
Yeah.
does come up in a lot of episodes now that you mention it.
Yeah, right. Data
That's
is
a
that
good point.
philosophical foil for people.
I have not thought of them that way.
Well, I got you to think about something differently today. So
Yeah,
I call that a win.
and you forced me to probably agree that I don't think I could see Star Trek without Data. So
Right.
I only realized that now that I think he was really an essential character. I
You're
love
welcome.
Data.
You're
I,
welcome.
I really do. In Picard, I think you have to have at the
Picard
very
and
least
Data.
those two. The
Right.
others you
Those
can
two
dispense with.
are pivotal. You can't
Yeah.
get away from those two.
Yeah, the others though, I could, as much as I might like some of the other characters,
Yeah,
I
the
think
others you could
have
replace here
the
and
show
there.
without them.
Sure. The others
Yeah.
you could replace pretty much ad nauseum at will.
And sometimes they do. I mean, I don't know if the characters are, I mean, the actors are on vacation or something, but
Yeah.
they're not in every episode.
No, they're not in every episode, but and Data's not even in every single. Well, no, I think Data
don't know.
is in almost every episode.
I don't know. I don't recall any offhand that he's not in or that Picard is not in, at the very least for a couple scenes. Yeah.
Right. Yeah,
I
there's
know
like a
ones-
scene or two here and there where they may not be there, but
Right.
they're always in the show. Another one is that no other character really in any of the movies, at least the TNG related movies, get this starring dynamic role as Data does in not Insurrection. It's the TNG movie with where they encounter the Borg again.
Yeah, Nemesis.
Was it?
Nemesis.
I thought Nemesis was the one with Tom Hardy.
Well, no,
Or was that
and he's not a
Insurrection?
Borg. You're right. I'm sorry. He's not a Borg. He's
Yeah,
some he's
it
something
was
else.
it
You're
was
right.
it was
You're
the
right,
Picard
you're right.
clone was.
You're right. You're right.
So I think it was Insurrection. I think it was Insurrection. Was the Borg?
It's been so long since I've watched the movies. I didn't like the movies as much.
The one with the Borg in it was the one that was my absolute favorite.
I remember
of
the one you're
movies.
talking about. I'm trying to think the name of it. I don't think it was Insurrection. Insurrection was really boring. I didn't like that movie. Gosh.
Oh no, it's not.
Yeah, it's
okay,
not
fine.
Insurrection.
I'm
I
just
know
gonna
what
pull
you're
up
talking
Patrick
about, though.
Stewart. No, actually, probably. Well,
Star Trek Next Generation movies. Yeah.
Yeah.
Um, I
First
wasn't as
Contact
yeah. Okay. Right.
in
Right. 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 Right.
96.
Right. Right. Yeah. Yeah.
First
I'm not as
Contact,
big
that's what it
into
was.
them, but that
First
was kind of their
Contact
way
was
of
my favorite.
continuing it. After the series was over, they had to continue it somehow. So,
Yeah.
but I mean, what they ended up doing is spin-offs. You have an episode
Right.
where
You have
DS9 is in
DS9,
TNG,
you've got,
and
yeah,
then Voyager was kind
Voyager,
of a
yeah.
spin-off of DS9.
Mm-hmm.
So, in fact, I think the first episode they are at DS9, if I recall correctly.
Yes.
Um, so yeah, I mean, and in fact, we could probably talk about DS9 sometime because there's a whole lot of allusions to the Holocaust
Yes,
with
there are.
what various people were
Mm-hmm.
encountering there. Um, in DS9, there's a whole lot of connections there. So I
Okay.
think that would be the Maquis basically suffered like the Jews
Yeah.
essentially. Yeah,
All right.
to the
So I think,
Cardassians. Yeah.
all right. So we've been going for an hour 45 now. I think we're going to kind of call it there. 4 people have been tuning in and watching. I really appreciate all of you for tuning in. So before we go, Michael, what do you got going on with R&T that we can give a shout out to?
Let's see what's coming up here. Sorry, let me just pull it up because I know we have some shows coming up next week. We have,
Right, just about
um,
every weekday at 6 p.m. Central Time,
yeah,
they
usually
usually
at
have an episode
6.
going.
Hmm.
I
Yeah,
know
we're
I'm
gonna
going to be back on the 16th.
right, and we're gonna be. I don't think we discussed the topic for that one yet, though.
I think we were just going to talk about morality, wasn't it?
Morality was it? Yeah.
I
Okay.
think
Good.
so.
Good. Okay. We have Father John Whiteford. He's an Eastern Orthodox priest coming to talk about original sin in Scripture, and then
Mm-hmm.
we have some SSPX coming, priest coming on the show next week on the 29th, and then Robert Singenis to come on and speak about geocentrism. So, and that will be on the
Geocentrism?
30th. He holds to geocentrism. This is a Catholic theologian. He's one of the very few who holds to geocentrism. He actually made a documentary a while back called The Principle, which you could probably find online on YouTube at this point. He's coming on the 30th, so you might be interested in that since it involves a lot of science.
I
Uh,
might be interested in actually being
yeah,
part of that,
yeah, that
being
would be
on that
fun.
episode if you want me
That
on, if
that
you'll let
would
me
be
on there.
fun, and you can kind of present some challenges.
Oh man, I'm gonna,
His deal, although he has a lot of science that he'll produce, to
mm-hmm.
back up his side, his biggest concern was that he believes the Catholic Church infallibly taught geocentrism. If I'm representing him correctly,
Mm-hmm.
that's how I understand it. He believes the Catholic Church infallibly taught this, so he has to believe it. Now,
Right.
I hope I'm not misrepresenting him. I'm going to ask him
We'll
about the
find out on
show.
the 30th.
We'll find out on the 30th,
And
so
now
tune in.
is that the 30th of this month or is that May
Of this
30th?
month, yeah. So in 5 days,
Ooh.
we'll be discussing it at 6 p.m.
What
Central.
time? At 6 p.m.?
Yeah, 6 p.m. Central.
Okay, so next Thursday. Yeah, if you'll let me, I want to be
Yeah,
on that show.
that'll be fun. Awesome.
Awesome. So,
Okay.
okay, so I've got some things coming up now, folks. On
Yep.
April 30th at 6 p.m. Central, I'm going to be on the Reason Theology show talking to Robert Singenis about geocentrism and why that is factually and flagrantly incorrect.
Yeah. It'll be me, you, William, and Eric probably. So
Okay.
it'll be quite a few of us. We'll all
Catholic on Catholic on Catholic
Catholic
on Catholic on atheist.
and atheists, right?
Oh,
But I think
man.
it'd be good if you want to throw in a couple objections here and there about
Oh, yeah, I
the
will definitely
science
have some
behind it,
objections.
because I think he has a lot of ammo prepared from a scientific perspective, and I don't really deal a whole lot with that part. So yeah, I think that would be
Yeah.
good.
I've got something that you really can't refute, and that's math.
Yeah, yeah,
When we look at things like that.
right,
Anyways, we'll
right.
get to that on the 30th. Also, we've got shows coming up tomorrow at noon. We'll have another Sunday service with Harry. We may be looking at potentially changing the times that we start doing those to see what kind of works better, what more people can tune into on that one. So that time is subject to change, not this week, but maybe the week after. I did have someone set up for next. I had a presupposition was set up for May the 2nd, but he had some computer issues, so we'll hopefully he'll have it fixed by then. If not, I'll bring it up next time. next time I can get him on. Um, Otherwise, I think I was talking to Elijah about coming on the second, so I'll talk to him again and confirm that. If so, it'll be in the evening. Otherwise, I think that's pretty much it for right now. And of course, my younger brother has chimed in with the George Takei thing, so I guess I would be remiss if I didn't attempt it at least once. Oh my. So, Matthew, my little brother, there you go. I hope you're happy. This is what you've unleashed upon the world.
Nice.
Thank you. Anyways, everybody, thanks for tuning in. As always, please remember to like, comment, and subscribe. And also check us out on Facebook. If you want to be on the show, email me at theatheistreformation@gmail.com. Or if you have a topic for the Sunday service. And also check out Reason and Theology on YouTube for Michael and the crew there. And me, I'll be on there now sooner rather than later. And also later. So there you go. Hope everybody has a great evening and have fun.